So we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully Elizabeth will be able to get her audio going. So welcome everyone to our Zoom forum. I know you're all busy and working on other things at times, but it's always helpful to have everyone's cameras on so that we can see your smiling faces, and we will be interacting today. So that helps us to engage and stay present, as well as talk with each other. Please be sure to keep your microphone muted when you're not talking. And then if you have any questions as we're going through this, don't hesitate to post them into the chat box. Okay. And so I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing your presenter tonight, Zach Hess. I worked with Zach as a director with Douglas County School District, which for those of you from around the rest of the country and world is the third largest district in Colorado. And Zach was a director of personalized learning, and his specialty was student wellness. And part of that practice was social emotional learning, the trauma-informed practices, and restorative practices. So Zach is now a consultant out on his own as of a couple of weeks ago. So congrats, Zach, for that. And I'm excited for you all to interact. It will be an amazing presentation that Zach has planned for you. And please, please, please do not be afraid to have your voice heard. It generates learning and understanding for all of us. So Zach, with that, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks. It's great to be here. So excited. There's a lot of information. Here's the agenda. But like Donna said, if you guys have things in the chat that you want to ask and we want to talk about some of that, I love it. The more interactive we can get, the better. I think it comes across as more authentic. And that's kind of how I roll with all this stuff. So I think we got to be authentic and real and have some good conversations. It wouldn't be restorative practices without that, right? All right, so we just do a little warm up. We'll do some of the outcomes that I hope you get out of this. We'll do a quick overview of adverse childhood experiences and that trauma work, and then overview of restorative practices. I saw some consultants around that. This is going to be a really quick overview of restorative practices, and you'll get my taste of it and kind of what I think about it. And then I'm going to make sure if I have to just go quickly through things, we have some time for questions and answers. All right, so a warm-up activity, and I like mindful moments. I think they are so useful throughout this work. One of the reasons I really like this as a practice, some of you I know are very familiar with this, but it also relates to me to the 90-second rule. And if you've ever read about that, it's the amount of time it takes for those cortisol levels to kind of dissipate when we get stressed, when we get angry, when we get dysregulated, because we get that way, and our students do too. But so this kind of practice can really help get our mind off of that, let ourselves reset and not get dysregulated. So if you will, just a real quick, I want to take 3 breaths of this mindful moment. It's a 4-7-8 breath. And while you're going through this breath and counting to yourself, think about the intention you want for our time together. And intention means not a goal, but I want to be more present, or I'm going to stay off my social media for this time being, or whatever that is. I'm going to open myself up to something new, even though I've been doing this for a long time. Some of you out there. So this 4-7 breath, if you could get in if you're seated, a nice seated posture. If you're standing, a nice posture. If you're a yogi, that good mountain pose, right? And close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And we're going to take an breath in for a count of 4 through your nose. And then you're going to hold that for a count of 7. And then you're going to put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and exhale for a count of 8. And that's a simple 4-7-8 breath. There's a lot of good science to this, but just want you to get yourself in a good relaxed position. And let's do about 3 of those together, and then we'll get started on the content. So go ahead and take a breath in. Hold it for 7. And exhale for a count of 8. Let's do 2 of those on your own. Okay. It also helps relax the presenter who is presenting in front of 62 people that he's never met. So it's a great way to calm everything down. Right. Okay, so the outcome, I hope today you get to see these connections. And there's that connection with trauma. There's a connection to our restorative practices and to the good social emotional learning work. They're all very connected. I hope you see that and hear that in this conversation. If not, please ask where those guys, like Zach, where were those connections? Man, I didn't see those. And we can do that, because I really hope that we do a good job, that I do a good job doing that for you. So the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. We could spend a whole 2-hour presentation on this, but just quickly, it's important that you understand this in this work, that you realize that there is widespread impact. This is fairly common. Adverse childhood experiences are common. The pandemic, that was one. And so a lot of people have experienced these. So just understanding that there really is a lot of this out there, and then recognizing those signs and symptoms of what could this look like, what this look like in the classroom, with our students. What does it look like with adults between each other? We all have our own things going on, right? I share with most people that in my life, in my early childhood, I experienced 4+ adverse childhood experiences. And so we all have some of these experiences, and they come to play when we're stressed, when in the workplace, and different things. What I hope that you see as restorative practices is a great way to respond. There's other good, obviously good ways to respond to trauma, integrating the knowledge that with social emotional learning and trauma, and we really hope that comes through. And then most of all, we want to resist re-traumatization. So we know the horrible things that some children and ourselves have been through, and we don't want to reiterate that again. We don't want to re-traumatize kids with some of the things that we do. I don't think anybody would really mean to do that, but sometimes it happens. And so I want to make sure we get some strategies so that doesn't happen. So those are the 4 basic R's of trauma-informed care. Adverse childhood experiences. There's 3 basic realms to that. The number 1 there, that household realm, that's stuff that we're pretty familiar with. And when they did the ACE study that Kaiser Permanente and CDC did in 1995 through 97, 17,000 adults, mostly white, mostly middle income, and mostly educated, college educated was that study. And these are the things that they were asking questions about. They asked 8 different questions really related to those household things we kind of think about when we think about trauma, right? Kids that are witnessing abuse or experience it or witness it, incarcerated parents, a lot of other domestic violence or mental illness or divorce is a big one. So that's kind of those kind of normal ones we see. The community. So a lot of people don't think about the community adverse childhood experiences with discrimination, historical trauma. Historical traumas are really interesting. If you haven't known this before, they've done a lot of studies of how the genetics of people have been changed. They did studies on Holocaust survivors and their grandchildren and how their actual genetics were actually changed 2 generations after that. So there's a lot of impact that can happen from just what communities can experience. Poverty, just food scarcity, all kinds of things. So structural racism, poor water and air, a lot of things. And then we look at the environment, and those are also sources of adverse childhood experiences. Like I said, the pandemic, I highlighted in red, it's on our minds right now. We know, and we've seen it in the behaviors of probably most people around us, not just the kiddos, but adults also. But those natural disasters, they do. Think of people that have been in flood zones and constantly going through floods and losing their homes, or the recent forest fires in the last couple of years that have just really devastated communities. We had one out here in Colorado just recently. That is, if you're a child going through that, it could have a serious impact. So, like I said, one of those things to be aware of is that widespread impact. We know that 61% of adults out there have had at least one ACE, 16% of 4 or more. That's important because the higher number there are, the more likelihood of an impact. Now, it's very important to understand that it depends on other things, your genetics, your family makeup, just some of the resilience that you inherently have, whether or not you are impacted by some of those adverse childhood experiences. Like I said, I had 4 or more, depending on the scale you look at. I think I did okay. I mean, I definitely have some things I have to work through that trigger me and how I deal with stress for sure. But I also had really some protective factors in my life that were able to protect me from some of those adverse childhood experiences. So just understanding that these adverse childhood experiences affect brain development and affect our health. I think there's a great video out there if you're really into digging into this. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, she did a TED Talk in 2015. It's like about a 15 to 17 minute, I think, TED Talk, and it's incredible. She really goes into the medical side of this and how it has affected health. So this is some of the negative outcomes of adverse childhood experiences that happened from this study by Kaiser and CDC. And these, you could see that as kids were experiencing this, there was disrupted neurodevelopment, which I kind of talked about, we'll talk about more. Social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, the adoption of health risk behaviors, like risky behaviors. They saw a big, huge rise in those, which then obviously will impact your life potential, what you're doing out there in life, what you participate in, and how you lead your life. And that can definitely then impact your the susceptibility to disease and disability and social problems. And they actually, when they did the study, found that people with 4 or more ACEs died, it had a life expectancy of 25 years less than someone that didn't have that many. So it's pretty profound impact on people's lives. And that's what Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris really talks about. It's pretty cool to listen to her talk about it, but it's pretty profound. So a big impact. So when we look at childhood development, a very simple representation, I didn't see in there if there were any neuropsychs or psychiatrists or anybody in this, so forgive me, I'm not going to get way into that. But simply put, so we all understand how this is really impacting impact our lives, right? And the neural development of our kids when experiencing adverse childhood experiences. So if you look at that, we know that the brain develops from the bottom up, from that reptilian brain, they might call it, but that's where a lot of survival things are happening in that part of the brain, right? And then into the limbic system of the brain, which is where a lot of your regulation and emotion is. And then later, as you go through life, then that neocortex or prefrontal cortex, all that part of the cognitive brain starts to form. And so if we look at a kid, at the very early parts in utero or right when they're born, of how the brain is developed and whether or not they experience some adverse childhood experiences or not. On the left is the typical development, right? They're born and the brain spends less energy and time actually developing those neural pathways around survival because they're being taken care of, right? They know in their brain that I'm getting fed, I'm able to sleep, I'm warm, I'm, all these sort of things that are really important to human survival, and they're being met. And so the brain doesn't devote as much time and energy to building those neural pathways because they're easily being made. Right. And so then they can move as they grow older, they can develop and start to think about how to regulate. Right. So when they cry, they're held or they're fed or something like that. They feel discomfort. Someone there as an adult is there to take care of them. So regulation is they're starting to see that when an adult is interacting with them and they see facial expressions and talking to them and all this just positive interaction that kiddos can get in that typical development, they start to then develop those neural pathways in social emotional. And then around that age 4-ish, right? That's when we get to preschool age, we are able to start developing cognition, right? Our brain has spent enough time making sure all those other things are taken care of. And now we can start to learn and we can start to think and do all those cool things. But if we look at a kiddo that was really impacted by some adverse childhood experiences, and now again, their genetics, their family makeup, there's something else that maybe these things have made a very negative impact. And when those things happen, right, a kiddo that's subject to abuse or even, in utero, there's drugs and alcohol and high levels of stress, introduced into their life. Their body is really, and their brain development is fighting for survival, just to live. So they're spending a lot of time and devoting a ton of neural pathways just to survive, to get those cortisol levels and those adrenaline levels to a normal state, right? Those dopamine levels to a normal state, all of that so they can survive, because we know inherently as a species, we need to survive. And so it's going to spend so much time and energy doing that. And so if it gets that figured out, then it can start to spend some time and energy for regulation. But again, in that development, if they cry and no one comes to them, right? If they're hungry and they show distress, but they're not fed, if all these kind of things that can happen, then they spend a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I regulate my body system? How does this happen if these things aren't being met? Because I got to survive, I got to keep growing. And so they spend a lot of time, those brains spend a lot of time with getting really good neural pathways, strong pathways for that. And as you can see, about when a typical child would be age 4, ready to start learning, right? Ready to start recognizing patterns and words and letters and, speech patterns and all this good stuff. Well, they're coming into school with so much less energy being devoted to that, because they've spent all that energy devoted to surviving, right? Regulating. And so they have problems regulating. So we see this. Now, if you think of that as a kiddo in preschool, right? And we're demanding cognitive attention. We need that in school. They're coming to school. So we're going to start doing this stuff with them, right? Hopefully now you can see why social emotional learning is so important in this work, right? We're starting to teach these skills and do these things. So it's developmentally in the brain, these behaviors, these things that we're seeing kids still, and it just gets, the gap gets bigger by the time they get to high school, right? Because they've started so much in a deficit that it just keeps going. So whatever grade you're experiencing or teaching, there's these huge gaps, and you're seeing problems with behavior and risk-taking behaviors and regulation and social emotional development, social interaction, all those things that you can get the Castle 5, right? So we see that why it's so important to have that time dedication to that, because there's, as it said, 16% or more people had 4 or more. So right now, I would probably guess that's even a little higher right now after the pandemic, but there's a lot higher percentage of kiddos that experience some 4 or more ACEs in their life. And that's going to be a huge impact when we're asking them to multiply and divide and do algebra and think about world history and do all these things. We'll talk about it, but that's a huge stress. It's a huge demand on their brain that a lot of their neural pathways have been dedicated to just surviving. So hopefully I get back to this and how that kind of portrays out there in the classroom and how those behaviors, how you see those behaviors. But anyway, that's a little piece of that. You'll see some of these, right? I kind of touched on them, but developmental consequences of the trauma. You can look at those lists, but it's things we see and we're like, oh my gosh, right? Like this stuff is happening. These kids, I see this in these kids. Now, I'm not saying this is all the result of developmental trauma, but it could be. And we don't usually typically take surveys, at least not, I've never done that in my classroom, is ask them and the parents to fill out a survey of how many adverse childhood experiences they had, right? But when I see some of these things, I see them having social isolation, difficulty trusting. Like I feel like I tried my best to always build relationships, but for some kiddos that the trust, I could tell they didn't trust me. There wasn't that relationship. And there could be some other things that happen. And if nothing else, I hope you hear some of my message in this is, even though it's very difficult, when those behaviors happen and they're to us, we take things very personally, right? And so that's just human nature. But maybe this might help us think, you know what, it isn't me. There might be something else going on there. And it isn't what I didn't do. It's just, I might have to adjust my approach, and I might just have to have a little understanding that some of these behaviors are there because they've resorted back to that survival brain, right? They're not in the thinking brain, and those neural pathways are so strong. It's not a conscious decision. It just happens. That's how they survive. And so, you see a snake in the path, you jump, you don't contemplate, well, is that a snake? Look at the head shape. I'm not really sure. No, first you jump and then you start to cognitively think about what's going on. Okay. Same thing, but those are some of those consequences. All right. I forgot at the beginning to do this, didn't I, Ellen? I wanted to get interaction, and I just started going. I want you, before you do this, I want you to think about like where the behaviors are coming from with kiddos, and why you think that those are happening, and thinking about some of the stuff you just learned right now. Is that changed your thinking maybe? So before this, maybe coming to this and hearing about this, and if this is new to you, children, they have we have behavior problems, and they disrupt class, and harm is done. People get hurt, adults and other kids, and it's really hard. It's very hard to see. It's very hard to see other kids get hurt, and it takes a lot out of us. So, but I'm wondering now, if you wrote down, why do you think students might misbehave now? After hearing some of that speech, just take a second. I just want to see if you write something down. Did any of this resonate? Some of this very quick overview of trauma, but hopefully helping you understand a little bit about where some of that behaviors might be coming from. And I'll give you a second to write that down and reflect a little. I think that's important. And if I see 13 things in the chat. I don't know if there's any more in the chat. If there's any other questions, maybe there's a quick question I can answer, since I skipped the whole beginning part on this work. Any questions? It was super fast. Yes, ACEs drive behavior. It can. I think, something to really think about too is, I say this is, my trauma is not your trauma. We have to be really careful about that, right? Because like I said, I had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and I'm doing okay, right? So I could see someone and be like, hey, yeah, I know you got a divorce, and there's substance abuse and mental health issues in your house. Same here, man. I'm doing fine. So let's go. Let's get it together, right? That could be really dangerous and really hurtful and cause lots of harm to have that kind of attitude, right? And so there's a lot of things that there's a lot of factors in place to whether or not you've been impacted by that, or a kid or hasn't, or they have. There's a lot of people that have a hard time dealing with stress that didn't have adverse childhood experiences on the other same side, right? Again, genetics, the way family, how you grew up, just who you are, right? So, okay. All right, so I want to talk about this stress a little bit, and it's important to understand kind of how this goes in the brain. We talked about brain development from the bottom up, but when we're dealing with stress, it actually starts in the cortex, right? We start to become overwhelmed in our thinking and our cognitive part, like trying to understand this. If we put it in an academic situation, right, we're getting new stuff, and as a student, it's causing stress. Now there's that happy medium, right? There's a good amount of stress for sure that motivates you, get you going. If you're an athlete, right, there's an amount of stress before a game, or this kind of thing that really gets you ready to go. So there's a healthy amount of stress, but there also can be overwhelming. And once it starts to overload, you start to get into the other part of your brain, that limbic system of the brain with the emotions, right? And you start to get that alarm going on, and you're starting to like, okay, wait, there's too much going on. What is this doing? Now, here's the thing. Kids impacted by those adverse childhood experiences and those neural pathways that are so ingrained. It's like the dog that runs up and down the fence, right? And that it doesn't matter what you do, fertilizer, whatever you put, that dog keeps running, and that is where he's going to go. I don't care what you do. There's whatever's on the other side of the fence. So there's that pathway that is just how things are going to go. And unfortunately, if you've made those neural pathways, it's an automatic unconscious decision once you start to get overwhelmed that you go bam to that basic survival part of your brain. And you keep moving lower as it keeps getting worse and worse. And then you get into this, I have to survive. And that's going to look different. You've heard of fight, flight, freeze. It's a bunch of different things that are happening, right? In a kiddo's life, it depends on their individual response, but some of those really aggressive behaviors, those really, all I did was ask you for a pencil, and it's like, they just go crazy. They didn't consciously think about that. They didn't be like, wow, Mrs. Smith asked me to get out a pencil. I don't like that. That's it. I'm going to swear at her. I'm going to throw this chair. No, that's not how it works, right? but for whatever reason, they might have reached that overload place, and now, boom, and they're in that brainstem, they're in that flight and that fight or freeze response. They're in survival. It is now I have to survive. And that's good, right? That part of your brain is important to go there automatically, because if a grizzly bear pops out, right? You know, you open the door and there's a grizzly bear there. So for some of our Canadian folks I grew up in Montana, so that's a reality, right? And the grizzly, then you don't think about like, oh, look at that cool bear. That's kind of, no, it is a survival, whatever you're going to do to get away from that grizzly bear, right? The problem is these grizzly bears don't really live in the classroom, but that's what it feels like. It feels like they're there, right? So great survival, great part of the brain when there's actual grizzly bears, but when there's not, it can be hard. So I talked a little bit about that, but that's what we're really talking is about, that window of stress tolerance. Okay, so if you look at the toxic stress brain, let's say on the left, right? When they come into school, it's as if everything is heightened, right? And depending on their environment, depending on what happened the night before or that day or whatever, I mean, they could be coming to us already with this heightened state, right? They're already on alert. Like, I just don't know what's going on, right? And so the window of stress tolerance, before everybody has a breaking point. Every one of us has a breaking point, right? But there's so much less room there. There's so much less tolerance for a kid or an adult that's already energized, right? Already starting to get dysregulated. And then the next thing happens and the next thing. And you know what? All I did is say, get out a piece of paper and pencil. And it just doesn't matter. It seems so irrational to you. I know it. I know, because I've been there. And you're like, are you kidding me right now? But that was on top of things that happened. And that was it. And that was the window of stress tolerance. Now, in that regulated brain and that other brain where that's not the case, and we're feeling pretty good, then yeah, all right, I forgot my homework. Oh man, I forgot my lunch. Oh gosh, I got a bad grade on that test. And oh, my mom says I can't go out and play with my friends this afternoon. Like it stinks, but I'm doing okay. Like I'm not ready to explode yet, right? I can take it. But there's a huge difference. And again, it's not a conscious decision. It's not like I feel like having more tolerance or less tolerance today, right? All right, so we're gonna do our first breakout. And Ellen is going to get us into groups, but I want you to think about that. I think about your window of stress tolerance. Think about, maybe even think about your child and your experiences and what has made you who you are today and how you deal with stress, right? But I know that we've all experienced overwhelm. And you know, recently life has been, it's just, there's a lot going on. How do you cope, right? There's positive, negatives ways. And what do you notice about that? What do you notice about your own physical health? When you're stressed, are you more flexible? You know, if you're a parent, and I know this for me, when I'm stressed, it's a lot different how I interact with my kiddos when I'm trying to do discipline, right? And it's not as restorative as I'd like. So let's do a breakout. I just want you to talk about this. Talk about some of the trauma stuff we've talked about, those adverse childhood experiences, some stress, and have a conversation. Talk about some of these things. And we're going to do some quick breakout. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but like 5 minutes in there, just to get some interaction with you guys.
Hi, everybody. I feel everybody's mute. Hi, Terry. I feel the rest are mute. Hi, everybody. You are mute, guys. You are mute.
I think we're back in the main room, no? Or did I end up in a different breakout room?
I think we're all
No.
in the big room.
Oh, there we are. Okay.
All right. Ellen, I think I have to share again. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do I have to re-share? Okay.
Let me know if you have any trouble getting it up.
Okay.
You guys. You got it last time. We got there.
No, I did. How did I do it? I don't know. Let's see.
Do you see the yellow icon on the bottom? Or sorry, not yellow, green. Share screen.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. And then it only goes to my, but I didn't want to do my whole.
Yep. So there should be the Google Chrome option.
Yeah, I'll do that and see if
A
that.
little tile
There
for
we go.
that.
Okay.
Oh, we can only see a white toolbar for some reason.
That's great. That's really awesome.
So if you stop sharing.
It showed up for me really nice.
Hey, Zach, this is the opportune time for you to talk about when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, it was equi. Darren, what did you say, man?
I say it's the exact time when you can talk about when you feel like overwhelmed from life and how you're gonna react to this computer glitch.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
See the deep breaths. Got to activate that vagus nerve. Okay. Yeah, it shares on mine, which is really odd. So I don't know why it's not sharing for y'all. That really stinks.
I can take over, Zach.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see if you can do that.
Okay.
That's weird. Okay. All right. So with all this, there's a lot, right? And we're going really fast. So try to break it down and be simple. We know through a lot of research and study around protective factors, risk and protective factors. Many of you probably heard of risk and protective factors. The things that protect us against a lot of different risk factors, including adverse childhood experiences and all three of those realms. Are protective factors against toxic stress, just a normal stress that we go through. It's about belonging. And when I talk about belonging, right, I hope if you guys are familiar with restorative practice, you see this connection, but it's about belonging. And that's the number one thing we can do for each other and for our students. It's about dignity. We all have an inherent self-worth and we have to feel valued, right? I have to feel as a human being accepted for who I am, right? And my experiences. Relationships are so important. We've heard this a million times. I know that, but it is so important that we form strong relationships with trusted adults, with our kids, and with each other. That we make these communities where we feel belong and valued, where there's connections, and where we feel like we have purpose. Like, it isn't simple work. It's hard work. But if we do nothing else but this, I'm telling you, we're doing some good, man. And I hope that's what you hear. And then that's what social emotional learning is. That's what being trauma informed and doing trauma responsive practices is about, making people feel like they belong and connected. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So I saw Dr. Thomas Joyner in a presentation one time, and it was really about suicide and suicide prevention. But man, it really resonated with me as a prevention guy. So like Don had said, a lot of the work I do is in prevention. I'm in universal supports when you talk about multi-tiered system of supports. And I knew this work about risk and protective factors. And I knew that connection and relationships was the number one protective factor. And then I saw this and I heard him speak. And I was like, oh my goodness. He's doing all this research around suicide, preventing suicide and violence. And if I could do something, if I could help teachers and administrators in buildings think of, like, take one of these things out of the equation, And I significantly reduce youth suicide, adult suicide, and violence. Right. Now there's this part in there that in that diagram, capability for suicide. That's a genetic thing that he's experimenting with. That's kind of key to his work. It's like the not fear of death, right? No fear of death. Like a lot of people that serve in the military are first responders, those kind of people that rush into the building, the building that's on fire, right? They don't think, oh man, I might die. They just do it, right? So there's something to that. But I don't know the genetics of all the kids and what they're doing. And again, those things could change also because of adverse childhood experience. What I do know is if I can help a kid feel like they belong and not a burden, right? So you see the two big ones there, thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness. If I can take that out of the equation, then I'm doing good. Like I'm making a difference. And to me, that's restorative practices. When I look at repairing harm and conflict, creating community and doing this work of restorative practices with that trauma-informed lens, then what I'm doing is helping people feel like they belong. Kids belong. I'm not kicking them out. I'm not shaming them for their behaviors. I'm not doing these things. I'm not putting on these ridiculous amounts of consequences that they feel like they're a burden, right? Or that I just kick them out of the environment so they don't feel like they belong. I kick them out of their sports programs. I kick them out of the places where they feel like this is my place, right? That's restorative practices. I can do this. I'm doing some good stuff. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so here's a good definition. But here's what I want. This came from Chicago Public Schools. But what I really, and this is just my experience of doing this for a long time. I have seen it. I've learned so many things and made so many mistakes around restorative practices. And I've seen school districts do this time and time again. If you don't put the work up front, if you don't look at the word of restorative and look at the root word of restore, if you don't have a community worth restoring back to, then if I'm a kid that doesn't feel like they belong or valued in that classroom, I don't care. I'm not gonna kick me out. Great. I don't want to be a part of your stupid community anyway, right? So the work, and it's hard work. I know that, but we just can't jump into let's do a restorative circle. Let's do some mediation. You don't do that work until you build relationships and community. And that's a community I don't want to offend. If it's my hypothesis, only mine, I haven't done any research around it, but I feel like if I'm part of a community, a classroom where I feel like I'm valued, I belong, even when I screw up, even when I make stupid mistakes, but I feel like I'm connected, people love me, that my dignity is intact, then I'm going to try really, really hard not to do some of that stuff that, again, could be just ingrained in my survival part of my brain. And I do these things that don't make much sense. Okay. So that's priority for me in this work. Next slide. I love this quote. Just read it real quick. That's a pretty awesome community. And I think that's what we all would love to be a part of, right? Next slide. I wish I knew who wrote that, but I don't. All right. We're going to do this in the chat. So I want you to think of your community, your favorite community, the place that on Thursday night or Friday night when it's been a really hard week, it was just bad, but this place you have the energy to go to because it gives you energy. Where is that? What is it about it? So in the chat, what are the characteristics that make it? Ellen says soccer team. Why? What is it that makes a soccer team? That's where you want to be. We all have these things in our life. I hope to God that you all have a place like this in your life. What is it about that place? What's the characteristics? I see some church and family. Yeah, judgment-free, welcoming. What else? What are the things about it? Laughter, fun, safe. Absolutely. Yeah, there's encouragement, there's energy. Differences are celebrated. People care. You can be yourself. Yeah, right? Happy hour. That's what one person said. That's what I'm talking about. These are all wonderful things. And you know what? I mean, I think a lot of people even say some similar things about their community. And so if you think about this, is there anything different that you think a kiddo, a student would want in a classroom community, or an adult, a staff member would want in a school community? Except for maybe the happy hour part. We can't serve our kids alcohol, so that's a no-go. But like, right? Kids want to feel important. They want to have fun. They want to feel safe. They want to be their authentic self. That's important. Yeah. So all the stuff that we desire is also absolutely what they want, right? So think about that. Think about what's so powerful for you, because that's what's going to bring a kid back, right? The work that we do to set that up. And it takes a lot of work. Not saying it doesn't. It absolutely does. And I hope with restorative practice that helps. Go ahead, next slide. So some of the foundational tenets of restorative practices. I know some of you are practitioners. You've been out there. You've been doing things. So many of you have seen the 5 R's, and I love the 5 R's. I think it's Dr. Bev Little, I think, is the one who came up with that, right? And I've used that for years. I presented, and I as I evolve in this thinking, as I think through and I make connections with SEL and this trauma and all this kind of stuff, I kind of came up with my own little thing, my own little infinity sign here about what to me really is foundational around this work in restorative practices. And again, it does start with relationships. I don't care. Again, number one protective factor. We gotta make those relationships and feel like we belong. Okay, but it's more than respect, because respect is earned, right? That's the difference between dignity and respect. No matter what, everybody has inherent self-worth and value, and we have to make sure that our communities have that. And every kid, even Johnny, right? Even little Zach, who, if you were my 4th grade teacher, you'd be questioning this right now. But even that person, like, how do we make sure that every kid feels valued and their self-worth intact in that environment? And then when things happen, right, harm will happen. They're children. We are human beings. I want to make a t-shirt because I'm human, right? We all cause harm. We all have conflict. But it's about accountability. And true accountability is people taking responsibility and having the opportunity to take responsibility. But it's more than just me taking responsibility. It's being held accountable. So when people say restorative practices, isn't that like in a circle, you hold hands and sing kumbaya? No. If you're doing restorative practices right, and you're dealing and repairing harm and conflict, it's a lot harder work, way harder than punitive discipline, because accountability takes work. That's a conversation, and you need to be accountable to the harm and repair you've done, right? With accountability, we'll work together. We still keep our relationship. I still show you dignity, and hopefully I'm showing you respect by holding you accountable for what the harm and conflict that you did. And when we do that, we make the community whole, because a lot of times in the classroom, when things happen, it hurts, it harms a community, right? The relationships are harmed. That harm, even vandalism, whatever you want to pick, right? It's harming the greater school community, your classroom community, your community with one person, that relationship. And when we do this, we keep relationships, we keep the dignity and respect, we hold people accountable, because I love you, but that behavior was not okay, because you don't get to hurt people. You don't get to cause conflict without doing the work to make it better. Like, that's accountability. You got to do the work, dude, right? I'll tell you what, as a dean, and I had kids, they were like, Hess, can you please suspend me? I'm like, oh, brother, I'm not, that's easy. So you can go home and play Xbox? I don't think so. We're going to do some work, man. We're going to do a lot of work, and you're going to do most of it, right? Because as an adult, I don't own the conflict, right? Why do adults think they have to own the conflict? I did that for a long time, and I got so worn out and tired that I finally came to that realization, like, hold on. I didn't call that teacher the F word. I didn't disrupt the class. I didn't kill a goldfish, right? Like, that other kiddo did that stuff, and they got to do the work, right? And that then makes that community whole. Good, next slide.
Zach, in the chat really quickly, Tara made a really good point. She said, shame and accountability are so different.
So different. Oh my gosh, thank you for that comment. Shame is so damaging. Go back to that slide. Don't go back, Ellen, but remember the slide, Thomas Joyner, right? Like shame is, I feel like a burden. Like shame is different than guilt. Like I feel guilty because I messed up. Okay, that's healthy. But shame is like a whole nother level of like, I'm not worthy to be here. I'm not worthy to be part of this community. I mean, shame is just so ugly. And there's no place in that. I'm not going to shame a kid to do better. I guarantee the research is clear. If you don't believe me, go look it up. That does not change behavior. It changes sometimes for the worse, but it doesn't change it for the better. It's so damaging. And accountability, we all need that. Like you guys all know the whole like 1950s, right, story of the kid that stole the lollipop from the candy store and the dad made him go back in and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, I stole your candy. And you had to get, right? Like, but that's so important to take that responsibility and have some accountability because it eats on all of us as adults have done these things where we said, I can't make your birthday party or I can't attend your thing because I got a cough, right? We've all done these things, right? And we feel horrible. Like that guilt, I just don't even like it. But so that's why that's important. But yes, thank you. Shaming, not good. Okay, social discipline window. Again, a foundational tenet. Love this thing. There's been so many iterations of this. I like this one. I searched Google images like, oh my gosh, how many people? This is so much fun to do with the school staff, like to do this and make your own. It is a really cool, real cool activity if you can get away with it. If your like leadership is on board with it, it's awesome. So if you look at this image here, this quadrant, you have an x-axis there on the bottom, low to high. And in that axis is relationship, support, encouragement, and nurture. So we're looking on this continuum here, right? We're not about relationships. There's not a lot of support and encouragement. There's not a lot of nurturing and loving. Now, you can wrap that all up in a nice little package, or they can be separate, okay? On the y-axis, low to high, we're talking about expectations, responsibility being given and taken, boundaries, because a lot of times we've got to set boundaries, right? Depends on the population. In our breakout, we had a breakout room that someone was working with kids that needed more boundaries, maybe more control in place, right? It's what's safe for them. When you look at a trauma lens, boundaries and control are actually very trauma responsive and very important, right? To have that predictability and know the limits is really important. So none of this is a bad thing, right? And so when you look at those axes and you look at the quadrant, you have the not box, the 2 box, the 4 box, and then the width box, right? And in restorative practices, we try to be in that width box, but let's look at those other ones. Look at the not box and look at the brain state. Okay, not box, not doing, we're low in a lot of things. We're not setting expectations in the classroom. There's probably little control maybe. I don't care about the kid. There's no relationship, right? There's not a little bit of loving happening in the classroom, right? To me, it's just very irresponsible in my mind. And it's neglectful, right? And not a lot of good's going to come out of that with that kind of a relationship going on, right? With the adult, that adult figure, that person that's in charge, that authority, right? The 2 box, if you go up on that, right, we still don't have a lot of relationships, all that going good. That stuff is still very low, but man, are we setting the bar high, right? We got some control. We got some high expectations, right? It feels very authoritarian, right? Punitive, coercive. There's probably a lot of shame happening there. Look at the brain state there. Look at those, like if you're thinking of a student with trauma, a trauma background, right? That's scary, right? I'm already walking into that classroom. I'm already at an elevated state because I don't know what's happening. It's scary. I'm going to be stressed out. That window of stress tolerance is about that big, right? So they're in the survival brain. I'm telling you, not good things are going to happen there. If we go down again and we go to like lots of loving, lots of relationship, but setting very low expectations, there's not a lot of responsibility you need to have going on, right? It's not horrible, but it's that kind of protective, permissive. Think about the time like someone invited you to be a part of a group to do some work, but then they did the work for you and that just kind of feels like, oh man, you didn't want me here. You didn't really trust me anyway. You didn't care what my input was, but you treated me really nice while I was here, right? So there's not there, we've all had those teachers. And sometimes it was a great time to have that loving teacher just take care of you. I get it. But when we're really talking about trying to get things done, it's not the best place. And then we have the with box where we're high on both access, right? We're like maybe it's a lot of great relationships. That's just their thing. Maybe it's not, but maybe it's just a lot of encouragement and maybe it's just a lot of support. Like they're just a really great teacher. And that you're able to then get those supports in place to hold them to high expectations, right? And so there's high expectations. Maybe there's lots of control and boundaries in there. And that could be really good for a lot of kiddos, right? It feels safe. Like even for any kid going in there, I know what's happening and I know that the teachers got this and they're going to keep the classroom safe. That's important, right? This is a place where we're in the with box. It's inclusive. It is restorative. There's still authority though. Don't get me wrong. The adult has to have authority. And in a trauma world, trauma responsive practices, that authority figure, that head of the family, they'll say a lot of times, is so important for our kids impacted by trauma, right? To relearn that. A lot of the times our kiddos with trauma, they're the adult, right? That was my experience, right? And so I had a lot of problem with authority figures. Ask my 4th grade teacher, God rest her soul, I'm sure, right? That was tough for me, right? And so, but having that, it can be really good. So that quote by Ted Watchell, that's the International Institute of Restorative Practices. I love this quote. The fundamental premise of restorative practice is that people are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes when those in authority, so teachers, adults, those in authority, do things with them, not to or for, and definitely not, right? So next slide. I'm going to go a little further. This is just my own thinking and evolution in this. It's not just about those in authority using that power with integrity, right? It's about shared leadership. It's about empowerment, because that's where that value comes into play. We want positive, rigorous, sustainable work getting accomplished, especially in an educational environment. It's important to set high expectations, because I want to feel like you're pushing me, like you have faith in me, like I can do it. But when things go awry, I need to be held accountable. We all need to be held accountable. Don't just shove it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen. We got to learn from it, right? We got to support each other in that. We have to have a lot of grace. And we make sure that people feel heard and valued. That's, to me, person in authority, teacher, administrator, leader, parent, right? It's so important. Next slide. I think this is a chat opportunity. So think about that most inspirational teacher you ever had, or coach, maybe someone in your life. Where did they fall in that? And you can see it right there. Where did they fall in that continuum, in that quadrant? And I bet that person came to life. When I think of my most inspirational educator or most inspirational coach that was there, it didn't take me long to figure out who that person was. Tell me about that person. So I see in the with. What else? Like, what was it about them that was so inspiring? And remember, being hard on you, holding you to high expectations, not letting you get away with stuff and no excuses. That doesn't mean you're in the 2, because that's not the 2 box. That's also in the with box, right? This is about gratitude. When we talk about gratitude and how powerful gratitude is, in your mind right now, give thanks to that person, right? That's really amazing. Maybe in your morning meditation or your evening meditation, if you're into that, maybe think of that person, give them some thanks. Be gracious that person was in your life when they were, because it's pretty amazing. Those people are amazing. I always wanted to aspire to be that. I wish I was all the time. I bet we all do, right? The other part of this is thinking about when you're stressed, when it's just not your day, which box do you fall into? Put that in the chat. Let's see where y'all go. What box are you? And if you say like, oh, when I'm totally stressed out and dysregulated, I am in the with box. Y'all, I need to know what in the world you're doing in your life to make that happen. Because I need some hints. I need some help with that. Yeah, Donna, you go in the 4 box. I'll tell you, part of my background is I spend a lot of time in the military, and I go to the 2 box. Definitely, that's the go-to. How about you, Darren? Yeah, I get that. The not box, not do. Yeah. It's just good to recognize that, right? I mean, I know we all want to aspire to be that up there, and sometimes, right? we get that other stuff going on. Okay, next slide. Thank you for sharing. Again, gratitude. Thank those people, those inspirations. They're amazing. So I think one of the ways that we get into that with box or can stay in that with box, working with people where they feel like we're doing this together, we're in community together, that we have a relationship, that you value me, who I am, in my opinion, is doing this work with fair process. I know a lot of people, you probably have seen this. This actually was not a restorative practices thing. It was developed by the Harvard Business Review. And they were talking about big organizations and how they maintain, like, 20,000 employees working effectively to make more money, right? That's kind of what their whole gig was. But the people there, I think Ted Watchell was one of them, an International Institute of Restorative Practices. I got this in their training around. It makes sense when you think about it, right? Fair process is simply engaging explanation and expectation. So authentically engaging with the people that you're working with. If there's something going to happen, if you're a school leader and you're developing, you need to do a new reading curriculum, like, how do you do that together? How do you authentically engage your community, your staff, your parents in a good conversation to really get their input, to talk about how we're going to do this? When you talk about restorative implementation, like the implementation of restorative practices, right? Guys, I'm going to really caution you doing that by yourself in your classroom alone. This is a whole school, much better whole district initiative, right? And because we want people to understand what's going on. There's so many misperceptions around this work. So many mistakes have been made that we want to really get people truly understanding what this is about and get them bought in. So engage everybody, engage your school community around what this is, right? Get their voice. What are their misperceptions? What are they not buying into? Get that engagement. Okay. And then let's explain what's going on, why, the reasoning, the research, if you have to. If you're into that emergenetics work, right, and the different personalities, some people like the data, the research, their analytics, they need to chew on stuff. Give it to them. Explain it. Why is this important? And then clearly articulate the expectations. Once you've made the decision, once we've created a plan and we're going down that path, what are the expectations? We all need that. We need clear expectations. Our kids need clear expectations. Do this when you establish classroom norms and expectations and rules in your classroom. Is it your community or is it all of your community? Is it yours and your students' community? Because I guarantee if I walk into a classroom and on the whiteboard, I see a list of 10 teacher rules, it's your community, it's not ours. So engage me. What do I need? How do I like to learn? What's going to work, right? I might need to tell you, I need to stand up like I am standing up right now because I got to move. Because if you sit me in that desk for more than 10 minutes at a time, you're going to be wishing you didn't, right? Like, I need to talk to you. I want to be authentic. I want to share what I need. So do that together. Okay. It's not a democracy. It's not, let's vote. Should we go to math class or go have extra recess, right? That's not a vote, right? It's not, I need to bring everybody in consensus. That's just not humanly possible. I don't think that not everybody's going to agree with everything. But I don't know about you, but even if people don't take my ideas, which I think are usually the best ideas anyway, but if you don't, as long as you explain it, I'm all right, that's cool. I know where you're going with that. Thanks for explaining it. And what do you want me to do? Okay, right? And people are going to disagree. It's cool. We need that. We need discord, right? We need disagreement. We actually need conflict in our life. That's how we grow, right? So it's not about you're getting rid of that, but it's actually how you encourage it in a positive way. Okay, next slide. All right, some of these other formal pieces of restorative practices. I just kind of make this so people can see this continuum of work. Different things take different time, energy, and planning, right? Again, this is intentional work. This isn't like willy-nilly. This is where things go awry, everybody. Like, again, not putting up that upfront work around building community and then just thinking, I'm just going to circle up 30 people and we're going to talk out our problems. I would suggest not to do that, right? We'll talk a little bit about some circle planning here again in a minute, but this is some of the formal pieces that I think are important. And I'm going to go through them really kind of the important ones really quick, but just that understanding. And you'll see that circles can take more or less planning. It depends on how involved it is and how intense it was, what the level of conflict and harm and how many were harmed, and that, and all of that to depend on how much time it really takes, right? So hopefully you can see that. We aren't going to talk about formal conferencing. That's a whole nother animal in and of itself. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice, and because the consequences of doing it wrong are really actually pretty profound, and we don't want to do that. So, all right, next slide. It's just a quick little thing. So affective language is so important to restorative practices, and I think important in anything. I wish I used it more when I was, getting in conflict with my spouse. That'd probably go a little better. But affective language is my way of interpreting the situation, my feelings, my emotions, right? I'm owning what that impact, and I'm expressing it, because again, feelings aren't wrong, right? We all get to feel however. I get to be mad, I get to be frustrated, right? I get to be sad, angry, happy, and I can express that without interjecting that onto you, because as soon as you start saying you did this, you did that, right? We're gonna get into it, right? We get defensive really quick as human beings. Kiddos that have experienced adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma, it's going to be a really big trigger when you start to use language like that. Okay, instead of saying I'm really frustrated right now. That's me. I'm owning that. It's personal expression of the feeling. It's being very accurate. I'm upset. The behaviors I'm seeing right now are really making me actually get dysregulated. I'm getting really frustrated. Okay, I'm focusing on the behavior, not the person, right? You might hear this in restorative practices. Separate the deed from the doer, right? The behavior might just really be bad, but the kid's not bad. They're not bad, right? Again, back to dignity. Still love you, but the behavior was not okay. So let's talk about that behavior. Okay, so that's affective language. The gist of it. They're the old-fashioned I statements. If you want to have practice, I feel this, right? Go ahead, next slide. It's a little more specific around it. It is really key to this work. So how do you do this? So when I'm talking directly to a person, I might name the person I'm talking to, name the behavior, and then connect it to how it's feeling. Right, Darren, the disruption in class, I'm really getting frustrated, right? Mr. Hess is having a real hard time maintaining my emotions right now. And I'd really like us to get back to focusing and doing what we need to do, right? Now, it might not feel great to get that, right? Feedback, right? Feedback is tough sometimes, but that approach is less than, Darren, your behavior is really pissing me off, man. This isn't okay, dude. Right? Because I'm telling you what, Darren's gonna be like, oh, you want to go, Zach? Let's do it. Right? He's a Marine, man. I'm not messing with Darren, okay? So, right, you don't want to get into that. There's no reason to get into that conflict. Let's try to keep it out, but we still got to talk about what's happening. Because if we don't talk about what's happening, we can't really talk about how we're going to be held accountable for that, right? In a situation, you can kind of see I'm really frustrated when people speed. Again, I saw you speeding. You're unsafe. You're a hazard to this neighborhood, right? Like, then I'm just going to come at you and be like, I wasn't speeding for one thing. And you know what you do? Like, right? Why don't you keep your dog on a leash? What's wrong with you? Right? We're just going to get into a fight, right? We're not going to get anywhere with it. So let's try to work on our affective language. It keeps the tempo, it keeps the emotion down a little bit. All right, next slide. Affective questions. Okay, same thing, same idea. So we're going to avoid words like why. Ask a 17-year-old boy why one time. Well, you probably already have, and you didn't get very far, I guarantee you. Shoot, ask a 22-year-old. No. So why is not what we want to use. We don't want to use should. Should's like, you're just saying, what should you do? That implies that I really screwed it up, and now I got and that you got something to tell me how I messed up, right? I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use words like what, right? How. So if you look at these, now I'm very specific here. I don't say, you might see in some restorative trainings, they use the word victim and offender. I went to an NACRJ conference, the National Association of Restorative Justice, Community and Restorative Justice, and had a gentleman in a presentation speak, a former incarcerated gentleman, and he's like, I don't really like that language. This really got me. And he's like, because I was a victim way before I was an offender, and I did my time, and I was like, oh my goodness, right? So it's harmer and harmed. Yep, right? People do harm and people get harmed. So I like that language a lot better. So for the person that was the harmer, that caused the harm, what happened? What were we thinking about? Not why did you do it? That's not going to get you anywhere. Let them talk. What happened? What were we thinking about? Let's get them in the accountability mind. Let's start having them think about how their behaviors may have affected others. Who's been affected and how are they affected, do you think? And they might be like, oh, I don't know. Like, well, your teacher, for example. So you just explained to me what happened, right? You got mad at Johnny, and so you threw the desk. And how might that have affected your teacher? Right? This is all, and I'm doing this in that voice. I'm calm. I respect that kiddo. I give him all his dignity that he deserves, 100% of it. And we're just talking. We're trying to figure this out together, right? What can you take responsibility for? And how do you make things right? Gosh, are you kidding me? I'm actually asking the kid that did the harm how he thinks he can make things right. Absolutely. That's accountability, because they have a voice and it's important. There's probably a lot of things behind what happened. And it's amazing what you get from kids when they start to say what I can tell you stories and stories of the most amazing things when kids start to come up with how they can make things right. Okay. For those harmed, you can see those. They need voice. In restorative practices, when we're in the reactionary piece now, when we're in the discipline side of restorative practices, you know, we've already done all our work. We built community, we built relationship. We're rocking that. And now we're dealing with harm, right? We spend as much time with the person that was harmed as we do with the harmer. And I know that's contrary to this society, because we like to spend a lot of time on the harmer, right? That's how we roll. But in restorative practices, it's equal time, because that person that was harmed, they need to talk. They want a voice. They need to tell you how it felt for that to happen. And they got ideas on how to make things right too. And they want to know you're there to help them. It's important. Okay, next slide. We're going to cruise. It's 5:16. Circle basics. Circles are awesome. I love circles. They are definitely a key component of restorative practices, but they are not restorative. Circles does not equal restorative practices. Restorative practices does not equal circles. They're a great tool to use. But that is, like I said, build relationships, build community. Can you use circles? Oh, 100%. It's an amazing way to go about it. But if you don't feel comfortable running a circle, fine. Figure out how you're going to build relationships, community, the with box, fair process, right? How you're going to do all that. Circles are a great tool, great strategies. Here's some basics though, right? Some things. If you don't hear anything else, plan like you do a lesson. Don't just willy-nilly circle it up, right? And don't circle it up the first time when harm was done. Oh my goodness. That can't be the first time you do a circle, because we're going to talk about who killed the goldfish. It's going to go really bad. Okay. 5 to 1, I say in there. You got to get kids, got to do positive, fun circles first. Check-in circles. Hey, circle it up. Fist to 5. How's everybody doing? Sweet. All right, let's go to your desks. I mean, we just got to get people in the habit of doing them. Start out easy. You can Google how to do circles. There's 1,000 books out there about how to do circles. I am not a purist by any means, but there are some books out there that you better buy into what they're saying, right? That's cool. Whatever works for you. But basics, there's a circle keeper. A lot of times that's the adult, but you can shift that. Sometimes it's a student. That's awesome, right? Making sure that's a safe space, making sure you're guiding the process, making sure that I feel valued, right? That we're following our expectations. You can use a talking piece. They're great. They're awesome. They really articulate who should be talking, well, who should be listening, right? The person, if I don't have the stick if I don't have the talking piece, then it's my responsibility to listen to who has it, right? A centerpiece is cool. It kind of represents your tribe, right? Your people, your community. Put things in there that represent you as the circle keeper. It's really neat. It gives people things to focus on, to remind them of what the classroom values are about. It can be really awesome. Guidelines and expectations, absolutely, and review them. This is how we do circle, right? Keep all voices heard. You know, you don't talk over anybody, you know, blah, blah, blah. Say your truth. You'll see a million. Google it. Circle expectations. There's a bit, you can do it, but make sure you have them. There's a different types of circles. Like I said before, 5 to 1. Make sure you're doing your positive circles. Circles, if you only do circles when harm is done, you're going to have chairs in a circle and kids are going to walk in and go, oh my God, what did Johnny do today? Right? It's just not going to be good. Okay. It's a safe space. Again, that only happens, again, if you do all that upfront work. You can't share feelings and take accountability for doing wrong and harming and conflict if you don't feel like it's a safe space and I have a relationship with that adult in the classroom and the other kiddos. Not going to happen. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay. Here it is. You'll get a copy of these slides. But planning is critical. Here's a great lesson plan, if you will. Here's for all those people that need that structure. Here's a great way to go about planning a circle. Plan it, or it'll get away from, you know, pretty soon it's a whole class period and you're like, what the heck, right? Plan it, how long you want it to go. What are you talking about? Are you going to use a talking piece, right? How am I going to get them engaged? How am I going to start out fun and then maybe get into something more serious? How am I going to check out with everyone and make sure everyone was okay after that circle is kind of intense? And what are we going to close with? Okay, next. Okay, mediation. Probably one of the most widely used ones, and also ones can get really, really misused. Do not skip the pre-conference. If 2 kids are in conflict or a bunch of kids are in conflict, if it's a teacher and a student, if you're an administrator and you're doing restorative and you're doing the teacher and a student, you got to do the pre-conference. I got to ask the questions first. I got to make sure, using my affective questions, to each one of those, that they're going to take responsibility for their actions and that it's going to be safe to get them together, right? And as you practice, as you get a sense of that, you know what you're doing, you know, right? But if a kid's not authentic, you know that. If they're not taking accountability and responsibility for what happened, you don't bring 2 people together to do that. You have to do that restoratively, not punitively, but you have to do that differently. And it's not through a mediation. It can be so powerful, but you got to set it up and don't skip out on the pre-conference. If everyone takes responsibility, you've asked them those questions, you feel like this is going to be safe for everybody involved and we're going to get somewhere, it's going to move us along, then do it. Bring them together. Follow the process, follow the structure, right? One person at a time is talking. You're answering the specific questions. Don't throw in a random question you didn't ask in the pre-conference. That's going to stress them out. Things are going to get crazy, right? It's about accountability. It's about coming up with commitments. And what are you going to do to move this situation forward and repair harm? Okay. A lot of times this is done by administrators, right? Because it takes a little more time. You know, I don't know the structure in your school, but that's what I would advise, because you got to do the pre-conference. Now you could do this in your classroom if you have time. You could talk to Johnny and then talk to Sally, right? And different times, and then maybe say, hey, we're going to come together at lunch if you know this is going to be a good thing and we can do this. It's always voluntary. If a kiddo says, and you ask them, like, is this good? Would you like to come to meet together and talk this out? And they say no, then you don't do it, because it's not going to do well. It's going to re-victimize possibly. It's going to do more harm, probably, right? So don't do that. Okay, next. Oh, okay, some guiding principles, and then I gotta stop for us. So we saw the brain on how we got stress, right? We started in the prefrontal cortex and then it goes down into our survival brain. But when we're approaching our students, we got to do it the other way. We got to look at our students. Are they regulated? I can't ask them those questions if they're dysregulated. And 2 seconds ago, remember the 90-second rule? If 2 seconds ago, they just threw the trash can across their room and called you the F word, don't go over there and start to say, what happened? Because then they're going to throw something else at you. Make sure that they regulate. We have to be regulated. Give them time, give them space. We will address it, but it doesn't have to be right then. 90-second rule. And that's just a rough estimate, right? Give them some space. Let that adrenaline and cortisol get out. Let them start breathing normal. Give them some water to drink. Boom. And then let's start. Then let's relate. Hey, man, that looked really hard. That was tough, right? Let's relate with them. Let's acknowledge that that was not fun for anybody and not that guy either, right? Let's regulate. Let's relationship. Go with the relationships, man. Leverage those babies. And then let's start to think through it. Then let's ask those affective questions. Then let's see if we can work to find a solution. Okay, next. All right, closing activity. It ends, we have like 6 minutes. Let's do this. We want to have, Ellen, are you okay? We want to have a lot of time for questions if we do 5 minutes. I'd rather let people come into this activity and talk. Is that cool?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so let's go into a breakout. We know that that behavior problems happen, and a lot of them can be around antisocial behavior, right? That's most common. If you do look at the research, that's what kids are being suspended and kicked out for, right? So let's look at that. Let's see if there's a way that maybe we could do this restoratively. So let's go. We got 5 minutes. Let's go to your breakout. All right. Hey, I know it's 5:30 and you guys definitely need to take your the survey here and do the feedback link in the chat. I can stay on. That was fast and furious. If you have questions, you want to write them in the chat and you want to stay on here, I know we can do that for a little bit. I'm more than happy to. That was a lot of stuff in that amount of time. So thank you for having me. I hope you found some nugget that you can work with. I realized that it was pretty superficial, you know, not digging deep into any of it, but maybe jogged something that you've already learned. And that always feels good to me sometimes, is I got something, I'm like, oh man, I heard that a million times and I forgot about it. But yeah, yeah, email me too. That'd be great. Give me an email. Let's work together. Like, let's figure this out. I really, obviously I'm very passionate about it. I really think it works, but I acknowledge that it takes a lot of work also. This isn't easy stuff.